Hi, and welcome to Learning with Power. Okay, so this is episode 9 in the series overall, and this is the 4th episode and the final episode of the 4-episode series of all that was all related to the rule of evolution. And here's the final episode. Okay, so in this episode we're going to cover basically the future and life on other planets. So first we're going to talk about the future of humans on this planet, and then we'll talk about the possibility of intelligent life on other planets and what's needed for that and what it probably would be like. And then we'll review all of the ideas that I've covered in the entire 4-part series, which basically, I guess I should write a book about it, but good luck getting it published. And if you self-publish, it's the same as doing this. It's no difference. Okay, so basically, to start off with humans in the future, what will happen, obviously, is that we're going to become more blended, and more blended, and more blended over time. Think like Brazil. So people in Brazil, and there's a lot of recessive genes and things like that become dominant or rear their heads or whatever, and so actually, skin pigmentation is one of the easiest things to change. And so in Brazil, you can have two people that are like, two white people can have like a black-looking baby, or the other way around. Two black-looking people can have a white-looking baby. And it's because of the recessive genes and things like that. And it's totally not unusual. And actually, there's a famous story that happened in Brazil one time where they actually switched babies at birth because the two white-looking people had a dark-looking baby, and the two dark-looking people had a white-looking baby, and so the clerks actually switched them, and they belonged the other way around. And so, so for like 10 years, it took them like 10 years to figure it out, and so for like 10 years they grew up with the wrong family, and then they realized that actually, their parents didn't look like them really hardly at all in reality. The other thing that's going to happen is people are going to become a little bit dumpier and shorter. And the reason why is because most of the world is. And so as we all blend together, your elite tall people and your astonishingly short people are probably going to get blended as well. And you're always going to have variations within a gene pool that can come up, as far as height goes and things like that, or as far as stature or weight and things like that. But in general, humans will probably get... The thing about height is eating red meat. That's the key to getting taller. And when hominids started to eat red meat, they started to grow a lot taller. And if you notice, the best in my observations, that I've made, is like when I was in China. And so when I was first in China, it was like 93, 94, around that time. And China was just opening up to the rest of the world. And there's all these big banners all over the place in Beijing saying, "Welcome overseas tourists," things like that. And everybody in China was very, very short, and noticeably short. And I remember because of the time change or whatever, I was still awake at like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and so I was going to go out and take a walk in the early morning, and they were like, "Oh, be careful! It's dangerous out there." And I'm looking around, and everybody's about this high, and I'm like, "I think I'll be all right." And they're like, "Well, they know kung fu," and I'm still looking around, and everybody's not this tall, and I think I'll still be all right. And so I wasn't worried about it. And in fact, everybody was about that tall. But now, they're not. Now they're like almost normal height. And, as we know now, the Yao Ming, people like that, there's very tall now Chinese people, and it's not unusual at all for Chinese people to be over 6 feet tall now for a man. And that basically started when they started eating more meat. And when they started eating more meat, it was actually because McDonald's and things like that started to come in to China. And they started eating at those places, and that actually has made the entire population within one generation go from everybody's 5'3" to now they're like normal height. And the difference is eating meat, and even if not red meat, like chicken, also can do it. And so it makes a big difference. And so as the world continues to develop, and economically, everybody is going to have access to red meat, and so everybody is going to grow up to the normal height. So then the only differences beyond that is going to be that as everybody blends, eventually man will become a little bit shorter and dumpier, because most people are. That's the majority. All right, but the other thing that will happen is that we will be better able to fend off diseases. As we continue to blend, we're going to have more and more diverse gene pools, and it'll be everybody will have more and more diverse gene pools. And so we'll be able to better fend off disease. And so not that we're going to live to 200 years old or anything, still 120 is probably going to be the limit, but a higher percentage of people are going to live to be 90, and like even cancers will probably develop some sort of immunity even against cancer eventually. And so, aside from heart attacks or accidents or things like that, a lot of people are going to live to 90. All right, and I don't think that things like our appendix or wisdom teeth or anything else that we can live without is going to get blended out, because how would that even happen? I mean, let's say, first of all, mutations are not recorded actually, but let's just say that the first person on record in the world was born without an appendix, and that would be a mutation. Again, we've got critical thinking involved rather than just instinct. So how would not having an appendix even be an advantage? What would, again, like I started to do before, you'd walk into a bar, you'd say, "Hey baby, I was born without an appendix." Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Wouldn't you want to mix your gene pool with mine, huh? Yeah, right? Get away, creep! Okay, well, I'm just telling you, this is your opportunity. And then she throws her drink in your face, right? So, it wouldn't be an advantage. Neither would having a larger cranium. And so the idea that, oh, there's life on other planets, and they're going to have large heads and big eyes and little bodies and things like that, that's not going to happen either. Because even if the first mutation happens, somebody's born with a larger cranium and they have a larger head, or even if they have a really super high IQ, these are not good things. People with high IQs have a lot of trouble procreating, much more than the average person. High IQ is not good. It's on the end of the bell curve, which means bad. Anybody that's at the end of the bell curve, bad. So that means any mutation, even if it's an improvement, is bad. And so it's not going to happen. We're not going to evolve to those things. We're going to pretty much stay how we are. And part of that has to do with tribalism and how we got to where we are. Because, oh, you're different, or oh, that person's different, oh, and that's a big problem. Everybody tries to stay pretty much with everybody else because staying with the pack ensures your survival. The more you're like everybody else, the better your chances actually are at survival. And so different is bad. So we're not going to really change, I don't think, all that much, except for what I already said. The other possibility is that we might blow each other up. And the thing is that any intelligent life anywhere in the universe, as soon as they start to develop any kind of technology, is going to develop WMDs. It's just an inevitable thing. And once they do, you have to assume that at some point they'll be used, because things don't get developed and then just sit on a shelf and are never ever used. And so we've been touch and go with nuclear holocaust for the last 80 years, and so far we've done a good job to fend it off. And maybe eventually, if we're able to have sort of a stronger UN that can actually have more of a League of Nations where everybody is more united, and you've got legal authority within this League of Nations. And so you've got international law, so that one country makes WMDs, it's actually illegal. And you have legal authorization for all the other countries to sort of, attack or do what they have to do in order to stop this country from developing those WMDs. That would be a possible solution, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. It's not best for corporations. It's not best for money, so I don't really see it happening. And unless it does happen, we probably will have some kind of a nuclear holocaust. And I think that having a nuclear holocaust with intelligent life is common. And so actually the thing that's probably the most possible, believe it or not, is actually like a Planet of the Apes scenario. So, it's after the Holocaust, everybody's blown everybody up, and humans have been almost eliminated. And then this other type of hominid, so it sets evolution back a bit. And so this other type of hominid evolves, and it would take longer than what is actually shown it would take like 1,000 years as opposed to 200 years. But this other hominid would evolve, and they may say intellectually, because they say in the movie, in Planet of the Apes, ew, humans, oh, disgusting, oh, that would be terrible, oh my God, they're just so gross. And we're like, what? You're the gross looking one, you look like a monkey. But they may think that way, that's possible, it may be possible that they think that way. And that to be like everybody else, you need to look more like an ape, because if you look too human, it's different. So it wouldn't be a good thing. So, believe it or not, actually, a Planet of the Apes type of scenario is possible. But again, that's setting back evolution, or let's say setting back progress or advancement. And so the idea that they're going to have superior intellect and all this kind of stuff, or superior technology and all this kind of stuff, again, you're assuming that there's enough time and that they don't set themselves back too many times, that there is a natural disaster that happens every 100 million years, and that there are, so that has to exist, and so eventually that'll happen again, so even if they don't blow themselves up, again, a natural holocaust will happen, mega volcano, or an asteroid hit or something like that, it's going to eventually happen again. It may be thousands or even 1,000,000 years from now, but it could set everything back. And those things will inevitably happen anywhere. Okay, so another thing that's going to happen soon, probably in the next few hundred years, is the Earth is due to go into another period of ice age. Because over the last 1,000,000 years, every roughly 15,000 years, there's been these called interglacial periods. But for about 85,000 years, we've had an ice age. And so we've been about 15,000 years of this latest interglacial period. We're due to go into another ice age. And it has nothing to do with climate change, or nothing to do with the climate, actually. It has to do with the Earth's wobble. So as the Earth rotates around the sun, and it spins around on an axis, it spins like a top. And so a top, will wobble every now and then. And so a top will spin, but every now and then it'll wobble a bit. And that's what causes these changes in the ice age changes. And so we're due for a wobble. And not too long. But the upside might be that we'll have full-on global warming by then. So, woohoo, we'll be prepared. And cold weather will be a good thing. Whatever. But that's also why most of the hominids evolved around the equator. Because the equator is not really affected by, this ice age changes. And so even if we have an ice age and glaciers come down from the poles, the equator is still in good shape. Because it's just a matter of whether the Earth is like this or whether the Earth is more like that. But always the equator is going to get the sun. Okay, so all right. So the other thing I want to say is that I wanted to reiterate about a point that I had brought up last time, and so I was talking about, so we didn't have enough time for evolution to take place in terms of blue eyes and blonde hair and all that kind of stuff. But with cross-breeding, you don't need a lot of time. That can be done, relatively, those sorts of changes can happen relatively quickly. But it has to happen with crossbreeding and not with evolution, because evolution takes instinct to take over, and it takes millions of years for evolution to take place. Okay, another observation that I want to make is about the Earth, humans, and this is regarding like some races. Okay, so I said that there was 3 major races, and actually, but if you are doing your taxes or whatever, or you're doing some government form or whatever, there's like 10 different races or something. And that's because they don't want anybody to lobby and feel left out, mainly. But if you want, there's another race that they don't even include, but it really is another race, and that is Mongolians. And so when I lived in Mongolia, Mongolians can actually claim that they are a different race, and one of the reasons why is because they do have genetic differences that most people don't have, and that is that they have a tendency to have less hair all over their body, less hair, I mean hair on the head for sure, but less hair on their body, and they sweat less. They have less sweat glands, and I noticed that when I was there, and that's why Mongolians really can't stand the heat. For them it's oppressive, because they don't really have an ability to cool themselves off very easily. And so heat is very bad for them, but it's because they've gotten used to the cold climate, and so they don't have as many sweat glands. And hair is generally associated with sweat glands, and also is generally associated with body odor as well. So if you're in an elevator in Mongolia, and there's 2 guys that came from the countryside and they're wearing these deals, and it's really hard to keep them clean. They don't really smell that bad. When Roy Chapman Andrews arrived in Mongolia in 1922, he said that they smelled bad, and because they never showered, they never bathed. It's because water was so scarce, they're landlocked, water was so scarce that they were like, not practical to use it for things like bathing. We got to drink it. We've got to use it for growing anything like potatoes or anything that we can grow, which wasn't much, but it was sacred. So to waste it on bathing, that's crazy, and it was crazy. But when it became more available as technology improved, well then, they don't have to shower much, and they still don't stink. Whereas in China, go down to Beijing and you're in an elevator. It's a hot, sticky day, and there's a couple of Chinese people in there. They might stink, and so will anybody else. So in New York City as well, so does anybody else. But Mongolians don't as much, and it's because they have less hair and less sweat glands. And people with more hair and more sweat glands, are closer to the equator. And they get curly hair and lots of sweat glands, and so if you're a mix of hominids or whatever that were all closer to the equator, you're going to tend to have more hair and more sweat glands. Okay, so also within Mongolia, there's there's 8 major types of people. The way that like 8 major looks, and one of them kind of looks a little bit like my wife that I had, named Martha, who was Mexican. And some Mongolians kind of look like Martha, more so than even Latin women, and which I thought is kind of an interesting thing. And also when you talk about like customs and like tribal customs and some of the ceremonies and things of like native Indians and of cultural Mongolians, they're similar. Even the types of colors, like light blue, for example, that are prevalent in their cultures are similar. And you can see the obvious connections between Mongolians and like Native American Indians. And it's clear to me that the way that we have Native American Indians is that basically you have people coming from more or less Mongolia, crossing the land bridges and going into the Americas that way. That seems to be an obvious thing. And so that's why I don't call Latin people a race, because basically they're Asians, Now, the thing about Mongolians is that the reason why there's stark differences in their appearance, like they have like eight different types, is because tribalism in Mongolia didn't really get eliminated until about 800 years ago. And so whereas the rest of the world got rid of it mostly about 10,000 years ago, Mongolia, even as of like 800 years ago, still were very, very tribal, and they were still fighting, lots of intense fighting amongst the different tribes. And what finally happened was Genghis Khan actually sort of unified all the tribes to be one whole group, and that made them very powerful for a while. So that's only 800 years ago, and so there's still evidence of tribes that are more clear, that you can see that these people are from that tribe and this other person's from that other tribe, and you can still see that the tribal influence more. Another thing about Mongolia is that, and actually, as far as them fighting with each other in Mongolia before 800 years ago, yeah, the fighting was fierce, and actually people that really look similar fight worse than even if they look a lot different. I mean, the Swedes and the Norwegians hate each other, and you're like, what's the difference? You guys look the same. But they are not the same in their eyes, and they hate each other. Irish also fight like crazy between Protestant and Catholic, you know, but they look the same, and you're like, what's the difference? You know, you guys, you know. And so, but to them, it's a big difference. You know, they don't call them the Fighting Irish for nothing. And so, the other thing the last thing I was going to say about Mongolia is that being on the edge of civilization, and Ulaanbaatar is actually the coldest capital city in the world, even more than Moscow. When you're on the edge of, let's say, civilization, you can see the influences of global warming more profoundly. And in just the time that I was there, like 12 years, off and on, I saw dramatic climatic changes in just 12 years. And the main thing that happened is that it got wetter, and it started to get greener, and all the rain, even in the heat of the summer, like at this time, early August, was icy cold rain. Whereas like if you're in Florida and it rains at this time, that the rain is warm, even hot at some points. It's like warm rain. But in Mongolia, it's ice cold rain, even in the middle of, even at this time in August. And it's because the water comes from melting glaciers that are way up in Siberia that are melting, and it's filling the atmosphere with more water as global warming continues, and so they're getting more rain, and the water is coming from glaciers, and so of course it's very cold. And so you can see that happening right before your eyes. And so it is happening. We can talk about it later. It's just a matter of what's causing it and what's not causing it, or making it worse, and what to do about it. Another thing that's going to happen with humans is that we're going to run out of oil. In about 150 years, there's not going to be any more oil on the earth. There'll probably be coal. Coal will last for a while. We've got a lot of coal, but we're not going to have much oil. We're not going to have any oil, in fact, in about 150 years. And so 1,000 years from now, people are going to look back at this time, and they're going to call this the oil age. And so about 150 years ago, they started using oil, and it'll last for about another 150 years. And so for about 300 years, there's going to be this age called the oil age. And I wrote an article about that and published that as well in a magazine. We can get to that later. Okay, so now let's start talking about the possibility of life on other planets and what that life may look like. Okay, now, as I had mentioned before, I think life on other planets we're going to find is actually very common. And either life now or that there was life. And I think we're going to even find other places within our own even solar system, maybe even, where we're going to find some life. But certainly within the universe, life is probably pretty common. But there's a huge difference between life and intelligent life. A massive amount of difference. And to get from life, like bacteria, to intelligent life requires a tremendous amount of luck. And a lot of things have to go right. And a lot of circumstances have to be just right, as far as what the planet is like, and the stars like, and there's a lot of things. And so probably intelligent life is very, 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 very rare. Plus, on top of that, you've got distance. That's another problem. If it takes 100 light years to get to a place. If a place is 100 light years away, that's pretty close actually in the universe. But if it's 100 light years away, and we're all carbon-based life forms, that means traveling at the speed of light, it takes 100 years to get there. And we can't travel at the speed of light. That's not going to happen. That's an absolute speed limit. And for people to say, oh, well, there's wormholes. Okay, so Einstein says the universe is curved. It's got waves in it. But he means kind of like this, kind of like curvy, okay? But then people theorize, oh, well, if it's got curves, and maybe it could curve so much that it happens like this. And you see that in science fiction movies all the time. That before they go on this great adventure, they're going to fiction movies all the time. That before they go on this great adventure, they're going to go through this wormhole, and you have some person on board of the ship trying to explain to the other scientists who are astronauts this 10th grade science concept. You know that they don't do that, that they would already understand the concept. But anyway, that's a wormhole, okay? Is if the fabric of the universe is curved so much that it could actually curve together, and then you could actually go from one end of the universe to another part of the universe very quickly by going through what they think could be a wormhole in between. So the thing is that we have never seen any wormholes. So we know what an astral signature is for a black hole, or a lack of a signature, or of galaxies and things like that, and what their composition even is. But we have not seen any signatures for anything that could be a wormhole. So, you know, if there's a wormhole, where is it? And it probably wouldn't be invisible. Because to create a wormhole, you need a tremendous amount of energy. And that energy has to come from something. That has to be generated somehow. And it's a lot more energy than what we could actually generate here on the Earth. So wormholes, probably not possible. You can't go past the speed of light. That is an absolute finite speed limit. And in fact, as you get closer to the speed of light, actually sort of a black hole thing kind of happens, and you have this like stretching out kind of thing. As you get closer, the actual molecular things, things, gets unstable, and it gets started to get stretched apart. So we maybe could go half the speed of light, maybe, but not the whole speed of light. And so if we go half the speed of light and something is 100 light years away, that means it'll take 200 years to get there, one way. And no carbon-based life form lives for 200 years, so you're going to have multiple generations on the ship in order to get there. So we're talking about a really major journey. And as far as UFOs being around the United States, or being around the world, I mean, why would they stay hidden? You know, they've been traveling for the last 200 years or more. You know, I mean, I would think if you're traveling through space for 200 years to get to another planet, you would arrive and you'd say, we're here now, woohoo, let's get this party started, you know. I mean, why would they be hiding, you know? Oh, we don't really want to bother them. We've come 200 years, we don't really want to bother them, or maybe we don't want to be too obvious. I don't care what this congressional hearings are saying. I'm seeing all over the internet, oh, they're saying there's aliens everywhere. Oh, are you seeing this? That's not what they're saying. They're saying that the probability of life, that there's life on other planets, is probable. Very probable. Yes, it is. But it doesn't mean that bacteria just instantly becomes, you know, aliens. Traveling aliens with superior intelligence and everything. I mean, it's great for the fantasy to work like that, but like I said, we don't live in a Star Trek world. That is not reality. It's fun to think about, it's fantasy, whatever, it's cool, it's not reality. We don't live in a Dungeons and Dragons world with goblins and things like that, and with dragons, and we don't live in a Star Trek world either. It's just not reality. Okay. And so the big problem is just distance. Now, as far as life, intelligent life on other planets, there probably is. But the chances of encountering this life, very, very slim. So keep these other things in mind as well. Life on this planet, everything was pretty much perfect on Earth in order for intelligent life to evolve. And even with everything being perfect, it still took 4.5 billion years to happen. Because the first thing that happens is the Earth needed to cool down. The core of the Earth needed to cool down, and the volcanic and geothermal activity had to stop. So that's one of the things that took a long time. So, another thing to keep in mind is that stars, like the Sun, burn out in about 10 billion years. So the universe is about 14.5 billion years old. So in order to have intelligent life, the planet has to be at least 4.5 billion years old. And so it can't be any younger than that. So if it's too new, if it's out there too far, it's not going to have intelligent life. But by the same token, if it's more than 10 billion years old, that's not going to have life either, because that star is already burned out. And in fact, I think that's what dark matter could be, but we'll get to that later on. Okay, so another thing to keep in mind is that all intelligent life will create WMDs. And it's not a matter of if they will use them. In most cases, it'll probably just be a matter of when. And that actually gets me to another, actually I have a movie idea about that actually. Because on every one of these other planets that has life, they're all going to have their own gods. They're all going to have their own religion. That's another guarantee. And they're all going to believe that their God is the one special God. Well, that conflicts with our narrative of that our God is the one special God. And so we're going to have our one special God, and some planet, maybe 2,000 light years away, is going to have their special God, and another planet 100,000 light years away is going to have their special God, and they're not going to have any idea about our God, and all of it is just silly. Okay, the other thing that I want to address is like the Avatar thing, or the general narrative of little green aliens or something, or avatars being blue. And I also disagree with that. And the reason why is because, first of all, in order to have intelligent life, or any life at all, you have to have a rocky planet. And the rocky planet has to have an iron core, because you need the magnetism that creates. And so it really does need to be like an iron core. And if you have that, for a while, that iron core is going to be molten and have a lot of geothermal activity. And you need that to cool off. The planet also cannot be too big or too small. So like Mars, for example, is too small. And so it had an iron core, we think, and it probably did have life for a while after the geothermal activity subsided, but it just wasn't big enough to create enough gravity to hold in its atmosphere. And so radiation bombards it still, even though it has may have a magnetic core. Wasn't possible for any life to continue to grow or evolve on that. So you have to have this molten core, and then that's got to be surrounded by some kind of a mantle, which is going to protect the surface from the intense heat of the core. And then on top of that, you need to have topsoil, which is going to be made up of a variety of different types of minerals. And so we're talking about arable versus non-arable. And so there's lots of places on this planet, for example, that you just can't really grow things very easily. Either the climate is not conducive to it, or the earth itself, the ground itself, is just not arable. Meaning it's just not really suitable for growing crops and plants and things like that. And there's degrees. There's some stuff that's like really arable, and there's some areas that are not very arable at all. And in order for life, intelligent life especially, to evolve on any planet, you have to have arable topsoil. And so there has to be a certain mineral composition of that topsoil in order for it to be arable. And there's not a lot of variations, actually. It has to be within a certain variation in order for that land, that topsoil, to be arable. And so that's another thing. And so blue skin or green skin, because the mineral content of the soil is different, it can't be that different. But what we will have is we will have different pigment variations. Yes, different pigment variations. Anywhere in the universe, you're going to have dark and light-skinned people. Whether it's brown people or whatever, probably will be on other universes, life on other universes. You're going to have different pigmentations. That's going to be really common everywhere. Okay, so another thing that I would like to say is that it's impossible for any of this alien life to look like some kind of an arachnid, some kind of spider, or some kind of an arachnid, or six-legged thing, or whatever. Now, movies have, science fiction movies, like horror science, has aliens that look like that because they're scary. Because everybody has some kind of arachnophobia. Everybody is a little bit afraid of spiders, right? Yeah. So that's why they have them look like that. But there's no chance that intelligent life is going to be an arachnid of any kind, because we've pretty much proven that insects never develop intelligent life, because you have to have the internal gestation for a certain amount of time in order to create intelligent life. Okay, so it's not going to be an alien arachnid, and that's a false narrative. And so you've got a lot of people who are like, well, we don't know. It's outer space. It's other. Who knows? Who knows? Who knows? Well, we do know. That's the thing. Actually, we do know. And just the same way as we know how other galaxies form, and other stars form, and other planetary systems form, and how other planets form, because there is a certain common rule that takes place all over the universe. This is how a galaxy forms anywhere. And there's galaxies forming right now as we speak, and they all form the same way as the galaxies had formed before. And so we do know, and just like the same rules, the rule of evolution of celestial objects works all over the universe, so does the rule of evolution work, and so will it work anywhere in the universe. And so we do know. The fact is, we do know. And the bottom line is that alien life is probably going to look a lot like us. And how do we know that? Because of the rule of evolution. Okay, so the other thing is, like I said, the most possible thing is possibly something happens as a result of a nuclear holocaust. Now, it's going to depend on what kind of a holocaust, and this could be on any planet that has intelligent life. There's always going to be a risk of a nuclear holocaust, because eventually they're going to develop WMDs. I mean, that's just, as life evolves and intelligence expands, you're going to have, WMDs, because you're going to have this tribalism anywhere. Tribalism is an integral part of the development and the evolution, if you will, of intelligent life. Is you're going to have this tribalism. And even as tribalism subsides, you're still going to have lots of fighting. And that's going to bring up WMDs. And so WMDs are going to be everywhere. They're everywhere. Any place there's intelligent life, they're going to have to deal with the threat of WMDs. Okay, and so finally, let's review the entire four-part series that we've done, and review with what new concepts we've introduced in this series. Okay, so in the first episode, we introduced the idea that Genesis is wrong, just plain wrong. There's nothing true about it in any way, shape, or form at all. Okay, number two, we've established the rule of evolution. And one of those rules is time. And that's a big important thing. And then any of the other related things to that rule. So then if this is the rule, if so this, then that. And then that, and then that is true. And so all the things that are related to that. Okay. The third thing that we discussed in the second episode is out of Africa is wrong. I'm sorry, it just is wrong. There's too many flaws with that theory. Out of Africa with hominids, maybe, but definitely not out of Africa with humans. Okay. The fourth thing is that there's three animal classes. There's insects, there's reptiles, and there's mammals. And that's it. Okay. And there's fish, things like that, but they're kind of like reptiles, okay? And the key between these three animal classes is the egg. Whether it's kind of something that's released into the air, whether they lay eggs like fish or other reptiles, or it's internal and there's gestation inside like a mammal. Okay. And then I've also said that there's three major races, and I know that's not politically correct or whatever, but there is. There's Asian, which includes Latin Americans. There's black people, and I mean sub-Saharan black people, and then there's Caucasian, which includes most people in the Middle East and even most people in India and stuff like that. Okay. So the other thing that we talked about, and this was in, I think, the third episode, is that there was a period of hybrid hominids, and that we have a lot of crossbreeding of hominids. And then the other thing, this is number 6, is that intelligence overrides instinct, and that alters and affects evolution. So now you've got conscious decisions being made by intelligent life, like even hominids had enough intelligence for this, to affect how evolution would progress from that point onward. Okay, and so the 7th thing too is that was also addressed in the third episode, is that you have crossbreeding of the hominids until eventually you have humans emerge, and then humans then didn't want any of the other hominids around because they're different, they're bad, kill them, and so they were all killed by the humans. And then the 8th thing, which is also in the third episode, is the idea of tribalism and what caused all of the hominids and humans to kill each other. And it still exists today, and its influence and effects on all of human life and activity today. All right. Another thing, this was in episode 3, the 9th thing is that there was a period from about 15,000 years ago to about 12,000 years ago that was a very, very violent period. And so the cessation of the last glacial period, and we went into the interglacial period, and it freed up everybody to roam around and encounter all kinds of hominids and all kinds of megafauna. Massive killing and destruction was happening. Very, very violent time. Okay. The 10th thing, which we covered in this episode, we talked about the scarcity of alien life. So that life on other planets is actually probably really common. Like maybe most solar systems in the universe probably have at least one planet that's got some kind of life on it. But the difference between life and intelligent life is vast. And in order to have intelligent life, you have to, not only do you have to have cataclysms happening every 100 million years in order to wipe out certain like insects and then the reptiles and things like that, but that also can set it back in terms of how much it evolves as far as how much technology has evolved, because anytime a nuclear holocaust, or you have a meteor, or you have a super volcano or something, anytime something like this happens, it sets evolution back a bit. So intelligent life and highly intelligent life, very, 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 very scarce. And there's the other problem of distance. Distance. Okay. Then the 11th thing, and that was in this latest episode, is that arachnid aliens, the idea that aliens will look like arachnids, which is like the most common thing that aliens are portrayed as, is completely wrong. And that's in fact a false narrative. So that's an absolute false narrative. So Genesis is a false narrative. Out of Africa is a false narrative, and arachnid aliens, that's another false narrative. Okay. And also that we probably have not had any meetings with any aliens, and so the Egyptians were not influenced by aliens. No matter how cool it would be to think that, that's not how it happened. Okay. And then the last thing is that actually intelligent life will most likely look something like us. And the reason why is because of the rule of evolution. And that concludes this series, and that concludes this episode. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching the whole thing. I know it's been long. I'm Scott Powers Houston, and you've been looking at Learning with Power. We'll see you next time. Take care.